Well, there's not been any communication between the two sides as far as we know, and there's certainly no indication that China or the US intend to back down at this point, although I suppose you could say that they have been sending signals to one another recently, and certainly over the past week, China has made at least a couple of attempts to reach out with a bit of an olive branch. Last Thursday, it's made concrete commitments to reform certain sectors that had been promising to do so all along, and then just in the last few days, it broke with protocol and released export numbers ahead of this tariff as well. But the US simply hasn't flinched at all, and as you say, has only threatened to tighten the screws even further. So yesterday we saw China accusing the US of being the aggressor and also asking Europe for support, although that's unlikely to happen because remember, Europe has an interest in the US putting pressure on China over these trade practices as well, and Europe has its own problems with the US as well, so it's not going to want to get dragged into its situation with China.
How bad are things going to get, do you think, in terms of individual consumers, people buying dishwashers, for example, they'll have to pay a little bit more. American farmers are going to suffer to a certain extent. But in terms of international trade, this spat between the two world's biggest economies, what's the forecast?
Well, we've got $34 billion worth of tariffs kicking in today, as we know, and then another 16 due to kick in a couple of weeks' time. And it doesn't look as though either side are going to back down at this point. And as you noted earlier on, Donald Trump said that he was going to increase the pressure if China intends to retaliate. And we're talking about a potential sort of half $500 billion worth of tariffs to be imposed against China. So in terms of damage, China certainly, from a trade perspective, has more to lose simply by virtue of the trade balance between the two countries. In terms of consumers, in actual fact, the import tariffs from the US don't target consumers specifically, although on the US side, because we are sort of looking at the agricultural products like sorghum and soy and maize, it is likely that people or Trump's support base are going to be hurt by this to a certain extent. Interestingly, we're hearing from analysts that this is actually playing out well with Trump's support base. And at this point, you really have to wonder, at what point Donald Trump is prepared to back down from all of this, because he does just seem to be determined to punish China, whatever Beijing does to try and appease the US. So even if China were willing to address some of its trade practices, you do wonder whether or not the US would back down at all.